Alrighty guys, today's the day we've been waiting for. We got two awesome things going on. Number one, today we're taking UglyTruck, the Turbo 8.1 Silverado, out for its maiden voyage. And second of all, we just met our goal of 30,000 subscribers. Now originally we wanted to hit 30,000 by the end of 2020 and we weren't quite able to make that happen. But yesterday on January the 10th, only 10 days after our deadline, we met 30,000 subscribers. So I've got to say from the bottom of my heart, thank you, honestly, to each and every one of you who subscribe to this channel, who comment down below, and who like the videos, because I couldn't do it without you. But you can't also make a goal without setting another one once you accomplish your first one. So for this one, we've got 12 months to make it happen. By the end of 2021, I want to get this channel right here with a little 30,000 subscribers all the way up to 100,000. And I know we can make it happen because you guys have been awesome. All right, let's get to it. Today we're gonna get this truck out on the road, but first we gotta do a couple little tuning related items. From the factory, this truck used two different sensors to measure how much air was entering the engine and therefore control how much fuel is going to be injected. And the first, this guy right here, is a mass airflow sensor, and it originally sat in the air intake stream just after the filter. And this basically just measures how much air is going by it. And secondly, there's a MAP sensor, or a manifold absolute pressure sensor. It's right back there and it goes into the intake and it just measures vacuum, or in our case, it's also going to be measuring boost. Now the reason why I'm not going to be using this mass airflow sensor is because it has a limit, or actually I should say the computer has a limit of how much air can be reported from the mass airflow sensor. And you run into a limit, and I think it works out to be somewhere around 550 or 600 horsepower. Now at first, I'm probably not going to be over 550 or 600 horse. I'll probably be a little bit less than that. But in the long run, we do want to be a lot higher than that. So it's just a lot simpler to say, forget about the MAF sensor and just go strictly with speed density, or basically the only sensor that this computer is going to be seeing that helps determine load is the MAP sensor. Now there is one more thing that we have to account for, because this is a MAF sensor, yes, but there's also one more thing that it does, and it also measures the temperature of the air. That little black, call it a little stud that sticks down right there, that's an air temperature sensor. And I've already relocated its replacement right here in the intake stream, right before the air enters the throttle body. But I need to get this thing wired up right into the mass airflow sensor plug. There's two wires on there. We're going to snip those, connect that up, and then we'll get a different MAP sensor installed, a manifold pressure sensor, because right now the one that's in there is the stock one, and it's a 1-bar sensor. It only measures in the vacuum range, or in kilopascals, that's about 0 to 105 kPa. Now, obviously, once you get into boost, you're going to be over 105 kPa, hopefully a lot more than that at some point. So we also need to be able to accurately measure that. So we'll swap out that sensor as well, and then I'll show you some of the changes that I've had to make in the tune to account for all these changes that we've made in terms of hard parts. For the mass airflow sensor, there are 5 wires in question that you need to deal with. 3 are for the actual mass airflow sensor part, and all I did was cut those at 3 different lengths, one just a little bit shorter than the next, and I put some heat shrink tube around the group of them, just so there's no way that they're gonna like touch each other or ground out or short out. And if I ever do want to convert this truck back to mass airflow, well, all I got to do is just cut that heat shrink off and resolder on the connector for the mass airflow sensor. Now there are 5 wires, like I said. The only 2 that you need to worry about for the inlet air temp are right here. They're pins A and B, black and kind of this tan-ish color. The other 3 are already taped together. That's the group for the mass airflow sensor. There's black with white stripe, pink and yellow. Like I said, that's mass air, that's inlet air temp. These are the only 2 that you need to deal with. Now, the engine bay for this truck is done. I even went ahead and I mounted the little coolant expansion tank that I've got over here. I just used one of the bolts for the master cylinder. I made a nifty little bracket, and I even replaced that weird red hose with a nice black silicone one. So this is pretty much what the truck is going to look like when she's all said and done. If you've been following along with this build series, you probably remember I mentioned putting a bigger fuel pump in, and this is actually it right here. We've got a Walbro 450 and then a Racetronics hot wire kit. That way we got plenty of voltage going from the battery down to the pump. But because that pump is still sitting on the table, that means the stock pump is still in the tank. Now this is one of those situations where I don't recommend doing what I'm about to show you that I'm doing. But there's a couple reasons why I'm going to. Number one, I'm impatient. This truck has been torn apart since October, and I'm ready to get it on the road. I'm ready to start tuning it. And number 2, it's just a good opportunity to shake down the truck before I make any other changes, because I am worried a little bit that that big 450 fuel pump is going to overrun the stock lines and regulator, and that's just one more thing that I'm going to have to order and I'm going to have to install before I can get the truck tuned and start driving it. So I am going to keep the truck out of boost. I'll just keep an eye on it, and also I'm going to keep an eye on the fuel pressure gauge, because there's a reason I installed it. It'll just let me know if the fuel system is doing what it should, or if I'm doing a little bit of a pull and I notice fuel pressure starts to drop, well, that's easy. I'll just take my foot out of it. Like I said, I don't plan on going into boost. I just want to get a head start on tuning the VE table, get those lower areas dialed in, because I have changed so much of the induction and the exhaust system. But all that being said, remember, do as I say, don't do as I do. I'm going to go grab the laptop and then we'll get started tuning. Okay, so first things first, I'm not a tuner. I don't claim to be. I don't love tuning. In fact, it does make me a little bit nervous, but I've done enough of it where I'm semi-confident that I'll be able to get this thing dialed in kind of where it needs to be, because I've got all the tools set up, and the tools are really what do most of the hard work. And the first thing that I'm going to get dialed in is the VE table, and that stands for volumetric efficiency, and it's more or less a model of the airflow that the engine will suck in on its own or have pushed in by the turbo. Now, a VE table looks kind of like this right here. This isn't modeled in 3D space, but the table looks like this. You've got RPM up along the top row here. You've got manifold pressure down the side here, and these are basically percents, or the percentage of the total cylinder volume versus how much volume of air is actually sucked in. And in the NA regions, it's going to be less than 100%, and in the positive regions, or boost, it's going to be a little more than 100%, because you're filling the cylinder with more air than it would normally be able to hold just by itself. Forced induction, that's kind of where that comes to play. Now, we're going to be using the VCM scanner. This is HP Tuner software, by the way. We're going to be using the VCM scanner to do most of the hard work here. So I've got the wideband up here, and that's sending voltage 0 to 5 volts to this plug right here. And so that's going to be overlaid in the data logger, and that is right over in this window here. Now this window, this is an air-fuel ratio error, so it's overlaying air-fuel ratio error in the same table where you get RPM and manifold pressure. So the software knows what the commanded air-fuel ratio is supposed to be, and it knows what the actual air-fuel ratio is thanks to the data logger and the wideband. So that's just going to make some corrections. As you can see, these values on the table, some are negative, some are positive. That basically means that it needs to add or needs to subtract fuel from a certain cell. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to load this base tune I have in here, do some driving around, and then just kind of do some steady state driving. And that's most important, because you don't want to do quick acceleration. You just want to hold it at a certain RPM and a certain manifold pressure so the computer can collect the feedback data and then move on to the next cell. And I'll show you that process as we're driving around. The base tune that I have on here right now, it has a few corrections. It's in speed density. I've got the 3-bar operating system loaded up, like I mentioned earlier. I turned off things like the short-term and long-term fuel trims, so it's not trying to adjust as I'm trying to read feedback from the wideband. So right now the tune's loaded up. I'm going to start driving around and we'll see how it goes. All right, so far things are going, relatively smoothly, pretty much for the first time I've been driving this truck. I'm looking at the log down there, and a lot of the vacuum areas, the stock tune that was in there is pretty rich. It's pulling, in some cases 10 or 15% fuel. And then in the little bit higher KPAs, I really haven't gotten to boost much at all because remember, I don't have a big fuel pump in here. But when I'm getting in let's see, about 60 to 65 kPa or so, it starts adding fuel about, 3, 5, I see a couple of 8%. So that means I need to add a little bit more fuel in those areas. So what I'm gonna do now is I'm gonna go back to the house, I'm gonna take this data that I've collected, this feedback, and I'm gonna use that to alter the VE table to basically make the corrections that the table is saying that it needs. And then it's just a process of rinse and repeat from there. Basically, you measure, you take your corrections, you apply those corrections and do it all over again. You just do that and do that. Driving around, collecting as much data as you can, driving as steady as possible. And then that's the process of tuning in a nutshell. And once I do that probably 5 or 6 times, then I'll start to get a little bit further and further into boost, and we'll go from there. So I've already made a couple of revisions to the tune file, and we're actually getting pretty close to dialing in the fuel mixture in the part throttle areas of the VE table. But I just wanted to stop and take a quick minute to kind of give you guys an overview, I guess, of what the tuning process looks like. And really the first thing that you need is a properly set up data logger. Now remember, I'm not a tuning expert, but I'm confident enough in my own skills, or luck maybe, to give you guys an overview of what it takes to do this. Now, HP Tuner software does come with a data logger, but it's up to you to configure the tables and histograms in a way that are useful to tune the vehicle that you're working with. And the first one that I always set up, and the first one that I look at and modify, is air-fuel ratio error versus RPM versus manifold pressure. Now, the computer, the engine computer I should say, already knows what it expects the air-fuel ratio to be, but it doesn't know exactly what the air-fuel ratio is, and that's where the wideband comes in. And if you know those two pieces of information, you can calculate the percent error. And that's how it kind of looks on this chart right here. You've got RPM along the top, manifold pressure on the side, and this is percent error right there in the middle. Now, as you can see, a lot of those values are, 0, 1, 2, or some of them are 3. And what I kind of like to shoot for is plus or minus 2, maybe 2.5%. And you never really are going to get it exactly at 0% error because there's so many small variables, whether it be a slight fluctuation in fuel pressure or a slight dip in air temperature or something like that. But you're going to get very close. And if you're within, say, 2 to 3%, the long-term and short-term fuel trims, whenever you re-enable them, they'll be able to make up that little difference because these computers, they're constantly making corrections and changes. Now, the next thing that I like to keep an eye on is I'm really not concerned with spark timing in terms of maximizing horsepower, but right now I just want to keep an eye on timing and make sure that it's not pulling out too much due to spark knock or spark retard. Now, I also set up a table over here. This is just spark retard versus RPM versus cylinder air mass in grams. And again, this emulates or matches exactly what the table looks like in the tune. Now, most of these values are 0, and that's exactly what you want to see. That means there's no knock detected. But there are a couple of areas. We got a degree, 1.1 degrees here, and a little further down, there's a few, 2.5 degrees of spark retard. So there's a couple things you can do about that. The simplest, and what I've done right now, is just go into the timing table in those specific areas and remove about the amount of timing that it's pulling out, so it's not going to want to knock or pull timing again from spark retard. Now, let's talk about fuel for a second, because right now, this truck has 91 octane fuel in it. And that's really the highest octane I can find locally at the pump. Now, if I put, say, 93 octane in, it would probably have a much lower likelihood of knocking in those areas. Or if I put in some sort of like a race gas, a fuel additive, that'll increase the octane of your pump gas. But I don't have either of those things, either 93 or race gas, available at the moment. So all I'm going to do is just pull out a little bit of timing just to kind of keep the engine safe in those areas. And later on, if I want to raise the boost level or, you know, put a little bit more timing in for a little bit more horsepower, then yeah, I'll probably have to get either, like I said, some 93 octane. You know, you could do E85, but that's a whole nother discussion. But the likely option I'll go with is just some of that race gas additive. But anyway, I've got another revision loaded up. I took that information I just showed you guys and I used it to make corrections to the tune file, and it's flashed in right now. And I've just got my laptop charging up because the battery doesn't hold a charge for all that long, and I don't have an inverter or anything like that. So whenever this battery charges back up, we'll hit the road again, and maybe this time we'll get into boost. So I've got a lot of the part throttle drivability stuff kind of dialed in where I'm happy with it. So now I'm going to do a really light pull into boost. Now there's two things I'm going to keep my eye on. I'm not going to look at the laptop right now. I'm just going to be looking at, number one, the wideband, but most importantly, the fuel pressure gauge. Because I've been noticing on the wideband, everything on the boost, or on the base tune that I have, is trending on the rich side. I'm not too worried about it leaning out, just so long as we don't lose fuel pressure. So I'm going to watch that, do an easy pull, and see how this thing feels under boost. A little bit of it. Just kind of easily roll into it. Spun a little bit. That's about 5 pounds of boost, 60 pounds of fuel pressure, holding good. 13.5 air fuel. That was pretty light throttle, but it felt good. Slow down a little bit there. Definitely going to collect some data on that tune. That will go make some corrections or adjustments to it. So far, it feels so good. I could even feel it kind of spun a little bit without even hammering on it too bad. So we're headed in the right direction. The good news is the wastegate spring, I wasn't quite sure what it was set at. It looks like it's about 5 pounds of boost, so we should be pretty safe on the stock motor for a while. All right, let's kind of get into it a little bit. All right, fuel pressure went down just a little bit there. It went to about 40 pounds, so I definitely do need to put that bigger fuel pump in. But guys, that is so awesome. I just rolled into it, it just blitzed the tires in second gear. This is so freaking cool. Woo. All right, let's go back, read the data, make a few more corrections. I love it. UglyTruck is back. Oh, that is so cool. I'm like a kid in a candy store, but this is so freaking awesome. Alrighty guys, I'm declaring this a success. Overall, this project so far has gone exactly how I hoped it would, so I'm happy, because the worst thing you can do is go out for an initial test drive and find something majorly wrong that you've got to go back and fix. After getting a boost, the first thing I was really happy to see is that the wastegate is opening and it's holding right around at 5 pounds of boost. And that's perfect for this stock motor because I don't want to push it too hard. Now, they do make boost controllers or a little bit stiffer springs, and obviously the temptation is there to bump it just a little bit, like to 6 or 7 pounds, but I think for now I'm going to try to restrain myself, but we're just going to run off of spring pressure. 5 pounds is perfect for now. I just want to get some miles on this truck because I don't want to do any damage right away and then have to tear it all apart again and start over. Now, this first thing that I need to do almost immediately is put that bigger fuel pump in, because there's a couple times I got into the throttle and the fuel pressure dropped, and I kind of expected it to, honestly. And in fact, it made fuel pressure, or it held fuel pressure a little longer than I thought. I was almost expecting, like, as soon as I got in a boost, the fuel pressure would fall off to nothing. But it held up, you know, fairly well, considering it's just a stock pump. So the very next thing I am going to do, I'll show you guys in the next upload. We're putting the bigger fuel pump in and the hot wire kit. Now, we'll get into that in the next episode, but the risk there is it'll make too much pressure at idle, which means I've got to get into the fuel system and put a bigger regulator in, and that's a whole other story, and we won't get into that right now. But I want to say this is a perfect video. I'm so happy, guys. Thank you for watching. Thank you for coming along with this journey with me, because it's been a couple of months getting this truck to where it is now. I'm so pumped and I'm so excited, and I can't wait to get it back out on the road and get it on a racetrack. Because if you guys remember from a previous video, I've already entered the UglyTruck into its first race coming up in April, and you're not going to want to miss any of it. So like this video, subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll catch you on the next upload.